Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Actionable Innovations Conversations. My name is Lucy Gray, and along with my co-founders, we're happy to have you here as part of our professional learning community. Today, we're going to have a great conversation with Ivan Cestero from the Portal Schools in LA, and we can't wait to hear from him. But before we begin, I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit about what we're about in case you want to get involved. So what we do is we are an inclusive professional learning community. You can find us at actionableinnovations.global. And we merged with this global education community that I started a number of years ago with Steve Hargadon. And we're trying to make it more about innovations around this world in general and in conjunction with some of the global topics that we've normally covered in our professional learning community. So that's kind of our focus. We support and inspire educational leaders. We host conversations and connect people. And we write about global education innovations in a Medium blog that you're welcome to. If you want to contribute to it, we'd love to have you. Anyone that's interested in this kind of this genre, we'd love to have your contributions. And we also are working towards, and my head's in the way, of a consultancy that will be kind of another side of this professional learning community. So we think that the time is right to kind of re-inspire people around educational innovation, and we really want to form a community around people who are sharing ideas so that we can take those ideas further. If you want to get more involved, this is my email address, lucy@lucygrayconsulting.com, and you can join our community. And if you have something going on in your corner of the world and you want to publicize it to people, feel free to post in our community, and we'll spread the word through social media and that sort of thing too. So those are some of our links. You can also find us on social media. If you want to scan this, it'll take you right to Linktree, and you'll find our Medium publication, our Twitter handle, our YouTube channel where this recording will be at some point, in our LinkedIn group as well. So that's a little bit about us. And I just want to say thank you, Ivan, for spending time with us today. And everyone, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to add comments. Your Twitter handle or LinkedIn profile is also welcome if you want to network with people. And then if you're not talking, we just ask you to mute your mic at some point. I have Ivan's information here too, which I'm going to throw into the chat so that you guys can follow him. And I'll turn it over to you now, Don, so that you guys can get started with your famous Inquisition. Or maybe you want to, maybe you first want to introduce Ivan, and then we'll get to Produced.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Hi, Ivan, and thanks for joining us today on the show. I met Ivan at Avenues, the World School, a few years ago. Well, obviously it was before 2018 because that's when you moved to London, right? And it was a student day that you can tell us more about. But of course, Ivan was the social innovation lead at Avenues, and it's, I'm not just saying this because I'm here. It's an incredible program, and Ivan, it was like so great to see what you were doing. And then Ivan moved to London, and now he's back. Now he's in LA. But here's what I want to say about Avenues. Does have amazing programs, and the best science labs I have ever been in. And I can say that as an ex-chemist. I'm an ex-chemist, but I was working on a project for another school. And, my job was the program design, and I would bring architects to different spaces. I've even been to spend time in Finland because Finland has codified a great education system, but the science labs and Avenues blew me away. In fact, I almost thought I should go back and teach chemistry. It was amazing. I've forgotten who the head of science is, Ivan, but he goes between the São Paulo school and the New York campus.
Yes, it was Mike Macaron. He's a global academic dean,
okay.
But he's been overseeing a lot of the science. I think he's doing more than just science,
Right.
but really integrated science and real world problem solving kind of stuff.
Yeah, and but the Ivan led the social innovation program, and of course, there's a whole other making program there led by Katie Garnier, who actually came to my Columbia class a couple of weeks ago and spoke to my students about making. So I feel like I'm very connected with Avenues, even though I haven't worked there. I know a lot of people there, and it's a great place. But anyway, so Ivan, we're going to start, just to loosen everyone up, with the Produced Questionnaire. So for those of you that haven't been here before, let me quickly explain. It's just a set of questions that were answered by the famous French writer Marcel Proust. And it's sometimes used today by, interviewers. If anyone's a Vanity Fair reader, you'll just go to the back page, and there's always a Proust Questionnaire. And it's the first thing I do when I open Vanity Fair. I go straight to the back. But anyway, all it is really is he took these questions, Proust, and he sort of answered them. And it became a very popular set of questions in Victorian times when they would have their parlor games. So what I've done is I've just taken it and adapted it slightly for educators. I found out as well that Linda Vassou, who's brilliant, who talked last week, a couple of weeks ago, about computational thinking in the teaching of Shakespeare. She uses it with her students as a way just to get to know them. So there are no wrong or right answers. And audience, please answer in the chat as well. So here we go, Ivan. What phrases do you overuse most frequently?
It's a great question. Well, in the professional regard, I certainly use "don't let perfect be the enemy of the good" very often. Really key phrase for startups and startup thinking, but also for students, to address students directly about their work. I would say I use "fail forward" in a similar context, almost as a command to folks and to myself, to encourage us to get things done. Other phrases that I use most frequently. For better or worse, I would say that since I've come to Portal, we're really trying to change the way school works, or we're really trying to change the way school is done. I emphasize the word "really" because I think a lot of education innovators make that claim. But I think there's a big difference between innovating around the edges and innovating from the core. And it's exciting and refreshing to be part of a project that is innovating from the core and really trying to reimagine what school can be.
Awesome, great, thanks. Anything in the chat, Lucy? What are we seeing?
It's me and my usual phrase. I use "awesome" too much. I wish I had something deeper that I was reusing all the time, but I tend to use phrases like that. How about you, Don?
I told you my most used word today has been the word "fossil." So I've been naughty. I'm calling people fossils. So
we were talking about the word "fossil" earlier, Ivan, because I interviewed at a school in LA actually yesterday, and I was the youngest person. I was the oldest person in the Zoom room, and I said, "I'm a fossil. I don't think I'm the right person for this job," to Don. And I don't feel like a fossil, but I guess we are technically. But that's one of Don's favorite words. And I can also say, after working with him for several years now, he also loves the word web 1.0. If somebody's a fossil, they're also probably 1.0 too.
Yeah, I say that's very 1.0. And people know what it means. So here we go. Question 2 for Ivan and for our audience. What talent would you most like to have?
Oh, so many. I think I would most like to have more of a STEM-based talent, just a better awareness and mastery of the STEM fields. I think that's something I deliberately ignored, probably in a willfully ignorant kind of way, when I was younger. When I was a student, I was a big humanities guy. It's complet major, great books kind of thing, writing papers, analysis, all of that. And that was before I really understood the value of integrated thinking, cross-disciplinary thinking. It sounds silly to say that now because that's really the core of how I approach everything is cross-sector work. So I think one of my weaknesses is that it's very hard for me to go into depth in this, in math and the sciences, because I never got that training. So I'm I can hang and have the conversation, but I did not have good STEM experiences in high school, and that kind of shaped my further thinking and studying for some time.
Right. That's interesting, Ivan, because I'm the exact opposite. I had I'm a chemist. I studied chemistry. I did a master's in analytical chemistry. I have an unfinished doctorate in public health engineering, but we somehow ended up in the same space. So, in entrepreneurship, innovation, design. So it's sort of interesting. Like, I often think, does it even matter what we studied to where we end up? Because I've had so many different careers at this point as well. This current one being design. So that's fascinating. So, like you said, I didn't read that much Proust. You did, So, but still, that's great.
I think design, by the way, Don, is a great way to come into STEM from the humanities side, if that makes sense. Certainly for me, I think, I was much more attracted to design thinking, entrepreneurship, and that helped me develop more of an appreciation for the value of the STEM side of things. It probably shouldn't have taken as long, but that's just the truth. And I think, design can unlock and illuminate a lot of the value of the STEM fields for humanities folks like me, without a doubt. Same thing with entrepreneurship, right? I mean, you've just got to develop an appreciation for the math and the finance, the money piece, and just the cold analytics, right? That I think the testing, the experimentation that is typical and core to the sciences, for example, are critical in that entrepreneurship space. So I really developed an appreciation for that via entrepreneurship.
Right. Yeah. The thing really, Ivan, is what we're talking about is creativity, and it's creativity from both sides. There are creative scientists, as like creativity isn't drawing a bowl of fruit, right? As we know, there's lots of different ways to be creative. So yeah. Okay, Ivan, how about this one? Who is your favorite hero of fiction?
Of fiction?
Yeah. Your favorite hero of fiction.
Wow. That's a really good question. My favorite hero of fiction is probably Don Gately, who was one of the protagonists in David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, which is probably the most important sort of, formative reading experience that I've had. I discovered D.F. Wallace in college and read through Infinite Jest a few times and ended up writing a thesis about it and a few others. But Patrick Bateman of American Psycho was also a pretty important protagonist for a completely different way, not in an inspiring way, but I'd never seen the sort of nefarious evils of American capitalism captured so well in a novel, not so well, but so uniquely. The work that was done with that character in that book was pretty jarring for me. So I would say he's an influence.
Wow, so that's so funny you bring up Patrick Bateman, because I read American Psycho on the Victoria line in London, and I was living in London at the time, and it was a book that I would be, so that's where I sort of read it, and you could see the faces on the tube, because, it was a out there book to read. It was very controversial at the time. So thanks for bringing that up. Last one then, Ivan. Let's see. What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Most overrated virtue.
Anything from our audience, Lucy?
I suppose intelligence might be the most overrated virtue. As a
That's a
teacher,
great-
especially, I think, the longer you teach, I don't know if this is true of everyone, but I think you tend to prize intelligence less and less, and it really becomes about effort and personality and kindness.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of intelligent people rest on their laurels and become judgmental of other folks. So in a way that can be a burden for highly intelligent people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. And I feel, I see a lot of independent schools hiring PhDs just for the sake of it almost. It's like, how many can we clock up? And, that does not translate to learning at all. And I can say that because I have done a lot. I spent 5 years at Imperial College London, wrote up all of my thesis except the last chapter, because you know what, I thought, I'm just not interested in this. And so I understand why people do it, but I also, and I'm out here on a limb saying this, I think a lot of the time it's actually a very selfish pursuit because it can be just about you. And I will say that having spent 5 years in a lab, but it depends on the PhD. Science PhDs tend to be, you are working in a lab. I was looking at water disinfection, alternative disinfectants, and I had a pilot plant and blah, blah, blah. But, it is something that you go deep into, deep, and not broad. And I think, we need a lot of broad as well. But Ivan, thanks for humoring me with the Produced Questionnaire. And
Of course, I think that's a great way to open things. It's
Great,
creative, and there's some interesting questions there. I like that.
Yeah, and there are plenty more, but we want to go right on from here. So again, Ivan, welcome. I'm so happy you accepted our invite, and we're really excited to hear about the portal schools. So could we start by just giving us an overview of like how you got there, why, and what they do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, before I talk about how I got there, just to describe Portal at a high level, we are a emerging network of micro schools that embed on corporate campuses with industry partners. We are competency based, which means that we're focusing on applied skills and mindsets and not on grades. We are diverse by design, which means that we have very socioeconomically and racial and ethnically diverse group of 30 ninth graders. We'll be welcoming 20 new ninth graders next year. And finally, we focus on, we focus on personalized learning, right? That's what competency-based learning unlocks, is that there are more options to differentiate projects. There are options for students to proceed through their learning at different speeds. And students at Portal get a lot of attention. And the final piece goes back to the being embedded on corporate campuses. We are really focusing on career-connected learning and trying to close the education to employment gap. That is a big problem. It's an ambitious goal for a school like ours, but as we expand, we hope that a big part of our value proposition is the direct experiential access to companies we partner with for our students. That means that students at Portal, even the ninth graders, have already started. They've gotten career workshops, mentorship, project consults, which is basically a design challenge that is designed and offered by the Belkin employees themselves. So we customize design challenges around problems they're facing in their company that for which they would like to have feedback or an answer or a prototype from students. And that was a big part of our J term this year, our January term. So as our students get older, there are other experiential career connected opportunities for them, especially in the sort of what we call the road to internships, right? So there's job shadowing, micro internships, and internships. So needless to say, being embedded with a company unlocks these opportunities for consistent exchange, for developing relationships, and also for unlocking value on the Belkin side, on the corporate partner side, right? And to be succinct about that value, you could see it as employee recruitment. If you're playing the long game, right, we're going to have a pool of diverse talent to which Belkin will have initial access, not just for hiring, but eventually for internships and for micro internships. There's a social impact play for a company that wants to show the world and show their employees that they care and that they're doing something meaningful and authentic. And that sort of aligns with corporate social responsibility and all of those concerns as well. And then there's employee retention, right? Again, all of these areas are related, but it's about recognizing that youngish employees, especially 40 and under, want to be engaged in a real way, giving back to the community or working with young people, working in a way that is meaningful and not ad hoc. So the last thing I'll say that I kind of skipped over is that part of what makes the accelerated work with young people and companies possible is that we're in early college, high school, we're dual enrollment. So our students are taking college level courses with Southern New Hampshire University that's built into our curriculum. And as that progresses, our students will graduate with a number of credits toward their college degree. And I think some of our more ambitious students will be able to graduate with an AA in 5 years. So if we can deliver on that, that's also a game changer, right? Especially for students coming from underserved communities to spend an extra year in high school, but to get an AA degree out of it is a really big deal. So to be honest, I'm still learning about dual enrollment. This is my first dual enrollment school. And we're still learning how to do it, how to execute it the best way on site, given everything we're trying to accomplish at school. So we will remain a dual enrollment school. And yet one thing we've learned this year is that it's really hard to do with ninth graders, right? So we're thinking of bumping up those dual enrollment pieces to 11th and 12th grade, especially with this year's batch of ninth graders who are suffering tremendously from learning loss.
Just quickly, Ivan, be of interest maybe to you before we move on, is that when you mentioned dual enrollment, Columbia University has a lot of dual enrollment programs. It might be worth just looking. Their most recent one that I know of because my niece just graduated is a dual program with Trinity College Dublin and Columbia University of New York. So they tend to be very big into this, might be something to look at. But anyway, so, okay, wow, that sounds like amazing. Competency-based, reverse by design. The fact that they're not in a school as such, they're in the tech industry must make such the difference. How do you recruit the students, Ivan?
Good question. Val, who leads our recruitment, is been working primarily with South Los Angeles middle schools and parent groups in that area. And I think the pitch for Portal naturally attracts certain types of families and students, right? So if you want to go to a traditional high school with 50 clubs and a big athletic field and 500 students, you're not going to come to Portal. But if you want more autonomy and agency and access to real world learning, you'll be very interested in Portal. And so, that's a kind of a painting with a broad brush, but our parents and students know, and they're told very quickly that this is a small school, this is a strong community, this is a new school, so we're building together. So there's an element of co-creation that's kind of enhances the agency, I would say, the agency piece. And it's a chance to learn, I would say, more on its own terms and more on one's own terms, because students are liberated from the traditional grading mechanisms, right? The traditional GPA and all that kind of stuff. So students who are excited to build their skills and do so in a project-based environment will be excited about Portal.
Yeah, because I think what's interesting, Ivan, is I think there's a lot of suspicion a lot of the time with education and industry, and commercial. There's that lack of trust. And I experienced this firsthand when I was running Tools of Schools, which was, essentially getting kids to bring product to market, but working with designers and engineers. And, there was just a lot of skepticism that we were taking ideas and, exploitation was often used, you know what I mean? But I think, with where we are in the world, this should be about partnerships with the industry. And, it's not always all evil. There's a lot of people in industry that want to get involved in this. So I think we've had the fallout of the all schools, so that's probably again pushed this whole thing back, whatever. So it was just so refreshing for me to hear about what you were up to, because I just think taking schools out of schools, is a really good solution and way to move forward, and that's what I feel you guys are doing.
Absolutely.
Right?
I second everything you've said. And, there's a number of different ways to do school well or better than traditional current formats. I think this is one of those ways. The key is to unlock with fluidity and fidelity and replicability that connection with industry partners. In my experience, and certainly in the context when we met, Don, at Avenues, I was working my network and reaching out to folks in New York City to do design challenges and projects with our students in a number of different electives. And that was great. And it was effective, but it requires a ton of work on the teacher's part. It requires, a lot of persuasion, talking months ahead of time with an organization to get them to say yes and to present the design brief. And it's just a lot of work to make it happen. I think the rewards are clear, but it's also clear why it's not done more often, because when you're doing it in an ad hoc way, it's just a tremendous amount of work. So I think the question we need to be thinking about at a systemic level is how do we do this systematically, reliably? How do we curate or identify a group of industry partners that are willing to engage with young people in the ways I mentioned before? It can be simple mentorship, right? It doesn't have to be a specific project with a deliverable. And then how do we create an exchange, a value exchange in which they also see the rewards? Because as I like to say, the rewards for students and schools are obvious, but the rewards for the industry partners are less obvious. And I think we have to move past this idea of companies or professionals coming from the from the goodness of their heart, which is wonderful, but that's just not going to cut it at scale. We need to really understand how access to young people can be valuable to industry partners from a number of different angles that I mentioned before. And then I think, we have the technology to create an exchange at scale. It's possible. We might not have all the policy levers in place yet. So we have to work on that end to make it possible, for example, for 16-year-olds to do real work with a company, right? Or for companies to recognize the time commitment it takes to allow their employees to work with young people and to maybe build that into their work streams. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And as we expand in LA and look at a couple of other models, we're trying to figure out the best way to do that.
Yeah, I totally hear you, Ivan, with the time it takes to, like you were talking about, teaching at Avenues and the time it takes. I currently teach 2 electives at Marymount School in New York, entrepreneurship and design thinking, two separate ones. But honestly, and people think I'm not an inefficient person, believe me, but for a 45 minutes experience, it can take me minimum 10 hours to design for that because of who I want in with me, who's coming in, who do I talk to, where do we get this, where do we get that? It's just not a traditional way of teaching, so it demands way more. And I often think, oh my God, how could I scale this down? How could I spend 4 hours instead of 10 to design this 45 minutes experience? But it's time consuming. And I also teach up at Teachers College Columbia, and it's a similar sort of thing. Lucy and our friend Andrew Gardner says, oh, you know, Don teaches a class at Columbia that he doesn't teach because it's me and about 50 other people that I have interact with my students, you know. But again, that actually takes a lot more orchestration of time than me showing up for 2 hours and say, hey, let me tell you, you know what I mean? It's sort of funny. But I think a lot of that as well is that what that is about is input. To have, like, creativity is about input, not necessarily output. And I just feel it's the huge amount of input that you put into anything is that will give you a creative output, but it's the input is like 10x times that you have to really put into it. But I wish I knew the magic to turn that round, but maybe this is it, what you're doing, you know, having a space in a company. So Ivan, I'm curious, how did Belkin, these are the first company to jump onto this idea. How did that come about?
Yeah, so the genesis of Portal is interesting, and I saw Lucy's question in the comments. So Portal kind of is an extension in many ways of Da Vinci Schools, which is a well-known and well-respected charter school in Los Angeles. And their founder and CEO, Matt Wunder, had been working with this idea for some time. And one of his good friends, Chet Pipkin, is the founder and CEO, or now ex-CEO. He's now on the board chair of Belkin. So like many great things, it emerged from a personal friendship, a personal relationship where there's a high degree of trust and a shared vision, a shared sense of the possible. And so Matt and Chet had been discussing this for a long time, I presume. And I think they originally wanted to try doing something within the Da Vinci fold, but as a charter school, there are a lot of limitations, at least in California, around what you can do with experiential learning at a charter. There are restrictions around seat time and reporting, and it's a bureaucratic nightmare. So that's why Portal is a independent school. So it was created its own school, independent. On the back end, there are a lot of connections to Da Vinci. There's, you know, our COO was a principal at one of the Da Vinci schools, a Da Vinci design school, for 6 years. There are a number of other connections. And our campus on Belkin International in El Segundo is a 5 or 8 minute walk from 3 of the Da Vinci campuses. So I think it emerged from that view of that corner of education reform and education innovation. And I think for Chet, it was also a bit of a legacy project, right? You know, he built Belkin out of his garage, basically, decades ago, and now it's a successful global tech and hardware firm. And, you know, he saw this as an opportunity to stimulate employees in a new way, right? And to give back to the community, but also, you know, a chance to create a long-term employment pipeline, right? Access to, you know, underserved, diverse youth is a big deal at the corporate level. So, you know, we're very grateful to our friends at Belkin for just having the vision and the willingness to try something out. You know, they've given up 7,000 square feet of their new facility. They've given their employees permission, you know, what we call people power. You know, this wouldn't work without employees saying yes to the mentor opportunities, saying yes to the project consults, right? So that kind of thing has to be communicated from leadership, and it's a culture building thing, right? So that's the story. And I think we're in the process now of tightening that on the ground, right? You know, in year 1, Belkin's going through, they moved their campus. They, like all companies, are dealing with how to bring people back to the workplace, you know, our new hybrid working reality. So they're dealing with all of this change while hosting a micro campus on site. So it's a lot. And they've been great. They've been patient, you know, and I work closely with Dr. Milo Dotson, who is an incredible psychologist and incredible human who's working on the HR side at Belkin. And I think he's an example of sort of like the ideal connector or intermediary you need at the core to make this institutional relationship work. So, you know, I meet with him regularly to go over the career connected learning interventions, assessing how it's going, being responsive to what their employees are seeing or needing, and all of this with a mind towards doing it better next year. So, you know, in April and May, we've been sort of ramping up as all schools do. You're trying to, it's sort of the hardest time of the year, right? You're trying to end the year strong, and you're also trying to plan for next year and put out fires so they don't happen again next year. So it's been an intense period, but really productive, I think. And we're kind of excited to have more students on campus next year and to begin a couple of new approaches with our partners.
So something that resonates with me from what you said, Ivan, is stimulate employees. I just think I have never had anyone that I've reached out to come in and work with my students, be it coaching, whatever. I think people are very generous and they really, really want to do that. But to harness it can be quite tricky. But another story around that is when I had tools at schools with Renat, my co-founder, and she ran a design agency with another partner, Johan Arulidin, in the Flatiron district, and we ran tools at schools out of there. And she came to me one day and she said, Don, she said, you know what, when we ever have a problem with someone in the office and I bring them in and I say, what do you want to do? They said, we want to work with tools at schools. They want to work with the kids, you know, because there was something where it just changed the workday for them. And it was this sort of great outlet. And so, you know, I mean, I'd forgotten till you mentioned the word stimulate, but it's like key to this whole thing because people want to do that, particularly in other places outside of EDU. And I'm now thinking like, how might we sort of do that again, you know, and what it's about.
Totally. I mean, your work is ahead of its time, Don, without a doubt. And I think it's from that entrepreneurship lens. It's like some great ideas fail not because of the concept, but because of the timing. Yeah. And you know, I think in the avant-garde or the early adopters for schooling and for education programs, you know, this is a big question of like how can we get past this hurdle to institutionalize and to grow these kinds of things, like running tools for schools out of a design agency is exactly what we need at scale. You know, we need designers at scale in cities and towns, bringing young people in for design challenges, doing workshops, sharing IP. And, you know, I think as a medium-term investment, I won't call it a short-term, but it's not necessarily long-term. As a medium-term investment, you are going to fire up your employees because they love working with young people, generally speaking. And then you're going to stimulate these young people to be interested in your company, to be interested in your field, right? So if you're thinking about growing your field, right, and not just working with, in many cases, the same group of elite, highly educated young people who studied design, yada, 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 you know, design is a great example of a space that needs to be democratized. And you know, it's architecture is a particular example. You know, we're talking with an architecture firm here in LA about being a host, you know, and their interest with us is really about making architecture a more diverse space, right? Right. The field is incredibly white, and you know, and I think not just in LA, but so that's just one example of like the sort of value exchange I think we need to try to explore.
Right. Yeah, so Ivan, I'm going to put you in touch with Renat, my old partner, after this, because maybe it's time for us to pull tools at schools out of the box again, you know. Yeah, we did get the website. The website disappeared for 4 years we lost the URL. And Renat texted me a couple of weeks ago. She said, why don't you Google tools at schools and see what you find? And there it was, everything from the archive she had recovered miraculously in somewhere. I don't know how. I was just happy to see it, but it is up again and running. And I was excited. It was interesting looking at these projects again and stuff. But Ivan, thank you for this great talk. But I want to open it up to the rest of the audience to see if anyone else has questions.
I'll jump in. So I'll take you guys off spotlight so we can see other people in a second. But I'm wondering what's next. So the Belkin relationship will continue on. We'll use, and you're having another class coming in next year. Is there another partnership in the works, or is that your job as director of partnerships, is to kind of find the next site for the next school, or how does it all work?
Exactly, Lucy. That's the one half of my job, is to find our next Belkins, so to speak, our next corporate partners or industry partners for our next campuses. Our hope is to grow and open between 4 and 6 campuses in the next few years. And so those talks have gone up and down. You know, it's a tough time to do this because of a lot of the change management issues I mentioned earlier that companies are dealing with. On the other hand, there are technically a lot of companies sitting on more unused space than before because they're never going to have as many employees back on the ground. And also, I think there's a broader awareness of the opportunity for hybrid learning, the need and the sort of imperative to innovate in schools and in education. And so we're looking at another model. So we're not just speaking with a number of companies about hosting our next campus in LA, but we're also talking with, I just had a call earlier with the Downtown Development Association, Downtown LA Business Improvement District. And I'm pitching Portal to these types of groups as well to say, hey, can you connect us with companies in a geographic area that might want to go in together on what we're calling a hub model. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback, enthusiastic response to this hub model in which 5 to 10 companies would be our official partners and would underwrite an independent space for our micro school that is within geographic distance of those companies in a specific neighborhood, right? So downtown LA, El Segundo, Playa Vista, you know, you could imagine the same thing in New York City, right? Like, you know, Midtown, downtown, uptown, Brooklyn. I mean, not all of Brooklyn, North Brooklyn, whatever. So, you know, I think it's a very promising model because the ask is lower per company, which means that you don't have to have 200 employees to seed all of the 5 things we want to do. You might only have 40 employees, but we're only asking for 3 mentors and 1 project, right? So it changes the calculus of how this works. And what I really like about the hub model is that it also places us in sort of a community school space, right? And the ability to work with not just corporate or big companies, small companies, social sector companies, NGOs, civic leadership organizations. And it requires our students getting out into the space and going to these places or inviting members of these companies into our space. So there's a great opportunity for us to establish the school as a hub, right? I mean, that's the idea. So it probably takes more of a investment up front, you know, to put all these pieces in place. But I think the return on investment from a student perspective is having access to more companies, right? More project opportunities. And from a neighborhood perspective with downtown LA, it's a chance to be a part of the revitalization of downtown LA. So
I was just there in August and stayed in downtown LA because Don told me to, and went to the new Apple store, which was amazing, and the market there, and so I could see that it's ripe for this kind of thing. And interestingly, Apple is, I don't know what the name of this program is. I don't know how it works, but I know that they've started youth media arts partnerships with local groups. And one is in LA using that new fancy Apple store. Another one is in Chicago, and I want to say the third is in DC. Um, and Apple tends to want to do things, their way, and not necessarily sharing. That's kind of my impression in general. But that, just so you know, I don't know if you know about what they're doing at that Apple store, but that might be something worth looking into. And then the other thing that occurred to me too is we're working with a youth group or I'd say a global education group. I'm not sure how they bill themselves exactly, called World Savvy. And they are in the Bay Area. They used to be in New York a little bit, and they're in Minneapolis, and they're looking to expand and partner with schools and institutions. And they're all about developing global competence in students, which I think goes hand in hand with this. So that might be another partnership somehow, either with their curriculum or they do, and they infuse a lot of design thinking into what they're doing as well too. So you might want to check them out as well. They're sponsoring. We're going to be doing a conference online in November. I used to run an online global ed conference, and we're kind of reimagining that. We're reimagining that, and World Savvy is a big part of it. So if you need an introduction or anything like that, let me know. But they might be good partners in this, and I think it's interesting. Those partnership relationships seem to be key, like to get that synergy and that vibe going, and it just seems like it could be magical with the right partners in general. So anyway, there's just a couple of thoughts there. Anyone else? Chris is asking. Chris, do you want to jump in? And Bill also has some comments too. Chris, do you want to take the mic, or do you want me to ask for you?
Thank you, Lucy. It's okay, you can take in, but I just wanted to say, I think this is a brilliant idea, and I like it so much. And my interest much is on the students that have some various special needs, and looking at this kind of opportunities, focusing on what someone can do and can really pursue in terms of their career. And I'm looking at this in terms of now students or learners that have some various kinds of special needs. How are you taking them in, making sure that they are not being left behind in this kind of brilliant idea? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. I mean, the first answer is that our students with special needs are getting served in a really helpful way, because they're getting way more attention per pupil in our model than they would at normal schools or traditional schools. So the first answer is just more in the personalized education approach. You get more attention from your teacher, and you have projects and learning tweaked for your own interests and your own speed. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, we have a psychologist, social worker on staff who is meeting regularly with students who might be having challenges of a variety of sorts. And that has been absolutely essential in the post-COVID, or it's not post, unfortunately, in the COVID landscape, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of learning loss that we're dealing with these ninth graders who spent, the formative years of 7th and 8th grade mostly behind a screen.
Okay, thank you. Even do you have maybe numbers in terms of the students with special needs so far that have benefited from this?
I personally don't have numbers. I'm not that close to the action, but we only have 30 students. And I think our teachers would say that, I mean, it also depends on how you're defining special needs, but certainly almost all of our students have come in with, I would say, below grade level executive function, self-management skills, some social emotional issues, just by virtue of the COVID situation, anxiety, We've been seeing a lot of things, as I think all schools have. But I don't have enough detail, Chris, to categorize that into more specific ways for you.
Okay,
I've been thinking a lot about this a little. Last week I went up to the college I went to, which is Beloit College in Wisconsin, and happened to run into the guy that runs an entrepreneurial center there. That's awesome, and he's talking about, and you might find this interesting, and I'm sure he would love your work too. You know, the big thing right now, the big challenges with liberal arts colleges is how do you make it practical and translate into something that they'll, you know, a career that you'll go into once you graduate and justify the $50,000 or whatever you spend on that education, you know, every year on that education. And so they're in this space, they're really trying to help the music majors learn how to operate a recording studio and those kinds of skills, or art students come in and curate and run the art gallery for a semester, you know, things like that. They're trying to kind of build those relationships across the college. And one of the things that came up was that they're getting a lot of students in the name of making things more equitable that are lacking the skills to be completely successful in college. And, you know, my view is, and I think this is also something that happens in high schools too. My view is that you take kids wherever they're at and you help them go where you want them to go, and you figure out what the support services are that are needed. But you know, how do we address, you know, where those gaps are in knowledge or skills or wherever, or and manage expectations around that too. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's, you know, I've never looked at it as I think some educators look at kids as being deficient, or instead of looking at what the possibilities are, I guess. And I tend to be more of a possibilities person, like you work with what you've got. How do you guys address different kinds of learners in that small setting? I mean, I know that you're not at the ground level, but related to Chris, what Chris is saying, I think it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no magic bullet here in any school setting, right? You know, it's always going to be a challenge to work with different kinds of learners, but you know, at the risk of repeating myself, I think just giving them more individual attention and allowing them to progress in different speeds and choose and have more voice and choice in their projects is already a huge step forward in that regard. But it is also possible that a school like Portal, as I've said, might not be for all types of students. And I think if we're imagining that within the context of a marketplace of school options, you know, that's okay, because there might be other schools that are more appropriate for certain kinds of learners. Now, the reality is we don't have a very well-developed marketplace of schools, as it turns out, which is of course part of the problem. So, you know, we're doing what we can with what we have right now. Our students are very happy for the most part. We have had some attrition in our first year, which is, again, pretty normal for a first year school. You know, we started with 34 and we're at 28 now, or something like that. And that's where we're at. But we do have a lot of students who feel like they're seen in a way that they were not seen at their previous schools. And we're working to develop the same set of skills that we think are necessary for career and life success. Like you said, Lucy, working with what we've got and meeting students where they are.
Yeah.
Bill, did you want to jump in and talk about your guild idea?
Well, no, I mean, I think, you know, there's certainly a long human tradition of this kind of learning and learning with people who are already kind of working in the field. And I would point to Barbara Rogoff, and she has this idea about learning by watching and pitching in, that even little kids in traditional cultures do. Like, you know, you're 2 years old and you're watching, you know, your parents make dinner and you kind of help out or whatever. But I think this is, you know, that sort of model certainly for, you know, we're working with people in businesses doing things. I think that guild idea is a long-standing tradition. I guess the thing I would wonder about is, this is obviously, there are real benefits for learners. There are real benefits for the communities that they're in. Can you talk to me about the kind of pushback that people give probably around things like assessment and testing in the future, and how are these kids going to get into college and what's going to happen there? Because that's always the sort of roadblock that goes up when people talk about this kind of innovative work.
So you want to focus on the sort of the college admissions angle, or the next steps for our students?
Oh, I think you could go kind of any direction, but obviously there is enormous social and cultural pressure, not from within your school or within the kind of, I think probably the parents and even the students involved, but there's this, huge cloud, in my experience, of people outside going like, okay, that's all fun, but and I just wondered how you respond to that, and what kind of messaging you guys do to help that defeat that sort of, roadblock.
It's a huge roadblock, and it's an important question. The short answer is, I think the dual enrollment piece satisfies a lot of families, especially our underserved families, right? Who are saying, it's a huge advantage if our kid can graduate high school with 6 to 12 college credits. That will lower the burden, the college burden for our family, but also equally as important, already prove to this child that he or she is capable of succeeding in college. So we know that there's a financial element to this, but a big psychological element, this feeling of belonging and imposter syndrome for students whose parents have not gone to college, et cetera. So that's one piece. Another piece is that, we think that the career connected component is a huge value add to a student applying to college, right? They're going to have experiences that are more robust and probably more meaningful than 95% of other college applicants if we do this right. So you're right. I think playing the current game, you lose something in traditional college admissions by having a competency-based approach. We all know the challenge there. College admissions is the tail that wags the dog. And Mastery Transcript Consortium and Mastery Portfolio and a number of other organizations are doing the sort of really hard work to try to turn that super tanker around, right?
Yeah.
And help and work with colleges and even employers to start looking at discrete skills, applied skills, portfolios. And so we're definitely on that team, right? Like that's who we're working with. That's where we've put our chips. But it's very awkward when you're in that transition phase, because most of the colleges are still playing the old game, right? And they're still looking at a GPA, or they're still looking at, your grades. So I think you have to see it as a sort of cost and benefit approach. And there's just no magic bullet. It doesn't exist, right? And this is why this is what holds back innovation at even great schools, even private schools, like
absolutely
our earlier discussion about avenues, right? Like avenues can do all the innovation it wants, but it's still playing the traditional college admissions game, right? It's still, here are your grades, what advanced classes did you take? Whose recommendation are you getting? And that's a huge, it's a huge impediment to progress, is what it is, because Avenue still has to articulate discrete classes. You took this class in this semester, and here's your grade, and here's what your transcript looks like. I think the future of education is more about, here are the skills and the experiences you've accumulated over your 4 years. Here's the proof of what you've done through applied projects. Here are the limited number of projects you've selected for your portfolio, so that someone either on the employer side or on the college admission side is looking at that and saying, okay, I can see that Jimmy's strengths are this, his mission in life is this, his pathway is this. Therefore, we think Jimmy is a good fit or not a good fit for what we're doing here at College X, right? That's where all of this is headed. So, the colleges are going to delay this as long as possible because they don't want to do the work. They don't want to make the changes that are necessary. But I think we know what's in the interest of our students and the young people. And importantly, employers are seeing this. So we don't have time for this now. I've got to jump, but I'm really passionate about this topic, Bill. And so I'm glad you asked this question, because what we're seeing in the education to employment pipeline, which I would consider K-12, college, and workforce, we're seeing workforces invest heavily in their own internal upskilling, right? Because they're hiring college grads who don't have the soft skills and don't have the real world experience. They have grades, they have a credential, but if those colleges are not doing real world learning and not working on soft skills, you get a bunch of people with a false sense of confidence because they get good grades in college and they actually don't know how to do things in the real world. They don't know how to function on a team. They don't know how
Which
to.
is ultimately so destructive to those learners too, because it's like they've got this thin veneer of, okay, you know, something, but when they get into the world, then they collapse too, which is just
100%.
really jarring. So I'm so glad you talked about that. It's exactly the answer I thought you were going to give, but I just thought it was important to talk that part out. I knew you got to go.
It's so important, and it's such a big piece of our model is that, you know, we're really proud to be affiliated with this small but growing group of avant-garde schools who are, you know, doing competency-based or mastery-based assessment, and really thinking about how to present a holistic vision of these young people to their next step. And importantly, because we're focusing on CCL, we've got to start saying that those next steps aren't just about college. Will the majority still go to college? Yes. Are the majority of students still well served by going to college? I don't know. The majority of our students, young people, don't go to college. You know, and our community college system needs a lot of work. So I think it's an open question as to whether college is the best next step. And if employers are continuing to invest in this micro-credentialing, upskilling approach, there's a good chance in the next 5 to 10 years that, you know, the college system is going to have to respond, because employers are changing the way they're doing assessment and hiring, and K-12 is changing the way that they're doing assessment. So, you know, colleges may no longer be the tail that wags the dog, like I said, because the current employment education to employment pipeline is anti-innovation. In all three elements, it's anti-innovation. We're seeing workforce become more innovative because of a sheer need to upskill their young employees, and that's hopefully going to have a downstream effect through the pipeline. And with that, I will step off my soapbox.
Okay. Awesome, Ivan. Thank you so much. Don,
thanks,
you want to
Ivan.
wrap us up, and we'll let Ivan go because he has another meeting?
Yeah. Ivan, thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge and great stuff. I mean, I love this idea, of course. It's like right up Don's alley, but you know, thanks for coming in. And I think we have a great follow-up session here, as Lucy said, to push further Bill's question and stuff. But Ivan, thanks again for everything. If there's anything I or us can ever do for you, you know, just let us know. We're all on the same page with education and innovation, and we'll just persevere. But